Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Sales Podcast. I'm Wes Schaefer, the Sales Whisperer, your host. I have to make this introduction quick. I'm doing this on a Sunday night. My wife and son they'll be home in about an hour. They're gone for 4 days, and then I leave in the morning. I am going to surprise my dad for his 70th birthday. He does not know I'm heading to Summerdale, Alabama, southeast of Mobile. So I've got to get this done, sent to my VA so I can play with the kids, say hello to my wife, pack my bags, and head out for 8 days, because after that, we're going to be heading over to Tampa Bay, where we will be swimming across the Tampa Bay for the Tampa Bay Frogman Swim. The proceeds benefit the families of Navy SEALs that have been killed and wounded in action. So all the money goes to the Navy SEAL Foundation. So it's a great organization. This will be my 5th year being involved, my 4th year trying to swim, and should be good weather. So it should be the 3rd time swimming it. Second time I tried swimming it, we had bad weather. So it's a tough swim. Should be expecting pretty cold water temps in the 50s. But if you would like to support me in supporting them, you can donate at helpwesswim.org. helpwesswim.org. That'll redirect to the I'm Athlete page, and you can see all the donations and everything else. So I appreciate your support. I've had a link and their logo on every episode of the podcast for as long as I can remember. So when you go look at the show notes, you'll see a link in each of those episodes as well. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Christopher Croner. I just interviewed him, and we had a great discussion on assessments. I've had Dr. Tony Alessandra on. I've had Bill Sturl, Barbara Metzger. A lot of people talking about assessments because it's important. And each one has a unique little take on it. And so I'd like his angle, his approach. I learned something as well going through this interview and then reviewing my notes. He has a very affordable test, and we get into, who can afford it, who can't afford it, what's the impact on bringing the wrong people on. We talk about sales management. So we've got a lot happening in this interview, and we kept it pretty short. I think it's about 30 minutes. So it's jam-packed with info, no fluff. So you are in for a treat. And as always, if you want to grow your sales and you want weekly interactive calls, head on over to makeeverysale.com. There's a monthly pay plan, or you can prepay and get 2 months for free when you join for a year. So makeeverysale.com. Check that out. Now let's bring on our guest, Dr. Christopher Croner. Thawing out, hopefully, in Chicagoland during the bomb cyclone, man. Welcome to the Sales Podcast. How the heck are you?
Hello, Wes. I am doing wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here and very much look forward to being of service to you and your listeners.
Well, I've got kind of a soft spot, or a curiosity killed the salesman, right? So around this assessments, right? That's your world.
Yes, it is.
Sales Drive. I've got my notes over here. We save companies time and money when hiring salespeople with our sales assessment, the DriveTest.
Yes.
So what are you saying, man? Are you saying us salespeople, we're just like predictable and you just run a little test and you know that my favorite food is pizza? Is that what you're telling me?
No, we don't quite get that superficial. We like to focus on the characteristics that are really important job-wise for success, particularly in those salespeople that are required to be the quote-unquote hunters of the world, the ones who are responsible for new account acquisition. That tends to be the position that most companies have the greatest degree of difficulty hiring for. So we want to make sure, as you can imagine, that the match in a situation like that is right, not only for the company, but also for the person. Because, of course, when we're looking for somebody that's going to be an effective hunter, we're looking for that person that's going to naturally enjoy kind of going out there and knocking on the door, if you will, get that door slammed in their face, then knock on the next door with that much more certainty and enthusiasm. That's a very special person that we're talking about. So we want to make sure that the match is right on all sides, not just for the company, but also for the person as well. So, again, we're a bit like a matchmaker in some ways on the sales testing side.
Right. And so I had Dr. Tony Alessandra on not too long ago. In the disc world, are you doing something similar? Do you have like your own proprietary tools that you found?
Yes, good question. We do have our own proprietary assessment, the DriveTest. So again, it goes after 3 non-teachable characteristics that research has shown to be important in that hunter role, if you will. So to give you a bit of background, we got started about 15 years ago now, researching everything that had been published academically on the topic of what is it that makes a great salesperson. At the same time, doing our own research, doing behavioral interviews with sales candidates, and then circling back with their managers thereafter to find out who really does become successful. And when we looked at all of that data, we found many of the things that you might expect to be important were, in fact, very important. Things like, say, persuasiveness and relationship skills and organizational skills. All of those were important. But above and beyond any of those by far were, again, these 3 non-teachable characteristics that continue to stand out and differentiate the high-performing hunters. Just quickly, the first one is what we call the need for achievement. And when we talk about the need for achievement, we're talking about the person who wants to do well just for the sake of doing well. So the person who's high in need for achievement just naturally wants to set the bar high. They want to jump over that. Then they want to set it even higher again the next time. So they're constantly focused on producing excellence just for the sake of excellence. That's the first piece. The second piece is competitiveness. And the competitive salesperson we find really wants to do 2 things. Number 1, they want to be the best among their peers. And number 2, they want to win the customer over to their point of view. Because to them, psychologically, that sale is kind of like a contest of wills. And then the third piece is optimism. And that's the salesperson's sense of certainty that they will succeed, as well as their resiliency to hang in there when they face the inevitable rejection that a salesperson has to deal with. So it's those 3 characteristics all together, need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, that psychologically create sort of the perfect storm, if you will. And collectively, we refer to those 3 characteristics as drive. The challenge, of course, being that past the age of about 21, 22, there's not much we can really do to change that overall level of drive we find. Either it's there or it's not. We can certainly work on things like relationship skills and persuasion, all those other types of teachable characteristics, but that drive characteristics is relatively solidified, if you will. And of course, the research also shows that drive is the easiest thing. Again, if you're a hiring manager, drive is the easiest thing for a candidate to fake in the interview and the most difficult thing to accurately rate. So that's why we advocate the use of the DriveTest again prior to the one-on-one interview, so that, again, our clients can identify those higher potential candidates and avoid spending too much time with the individuals whom they might describe as the good actors or the professional interviewers, if you will.
So can you say that again? Drive is the easiest to fake in an interview and what?
And the most difficult to accurately rate.
Yeah. I have a feeling you can rate it.
Using well-constructed behavioral interview questions, you certainly can get at that characteristic. Again, we like to say the well-constructed test is like the X-ray. It allows us to see, there's something here. Then the person who, makes it past that point.
Christopher, can you get a little closer to the mic?
Of course.
No,
Does that sound a little bit better?
Oh, thank you.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, we start out with the assessment and then bring the person into the one-on-one interview. And that's where you really dig deep. The well-constructed test is like the X-ray. The well-constructed behavioral interview is like the CAT scan. That's where you really dig down, keeping in mind, of course, that the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. So the key in the interview is to ask the candidate the right series of questions to help us determine whether or not they have consistently engaged in behaviors in the past that reflect the types of characteristics that we want to see out of them going forward.
So you're giving the company the multiple choice test, but then you're also giving them the questions and how to structure this interview, right? To go deeper into the assessment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So we want to make sure that we're doing a thorough process for the candidates, especially, again, when you're trusting that person to come on board as your hunter, you really want to make sure you do a thorough job of the hiring process, if you will.
And you said by what age? Was it 22 or 32 when things are set?
Relatively set by the time the person is 21, 22. It's not uncommon, as you can imagine. If I'll give a presentation, people will come up and they'll be like, well, what about my kids? What leads to someone having high drive? And it's really a combination of 2 things. It's both nature and nurture, if you will. So on the nature side, there's the way the person is naturally wired at birth. So there are 5 big personality characteristics that psychologists look at in describing the human personality, one of which is called conscientiousness. There are several facets of conscientiousness, but the most important one for our discussion today is what's called achievement orientation. That kid that just has to get an A, if you will. It's that type of mentality that you're kind of born with. But then at the same time, there's the nurture side. So the person that ends up having that high need for achievement not only has that wiring, but the parents also hold them accountable. And they could hold them accountable for a variety of things. It could be they hold them accountable for academic performance. It could be athletic performance. It could be they're watching their brothers and sisters. They're in band, whatever it is. It's that combination of the wiring with being held accountable. By the time the person's in their late teens, early 20s, that characteristic is relatively solidified.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know companies are going to push back, especially smaller companies. Well, small companies push back and say, hey, I don't have the money. And bigger companies push back and say, hey, we've been doing this for a long time. We don't really need any outside help. What do you – so let's talk about both of those. So the small business that thinks they don't have the money to invest in something like this, what do you tell them?
Good question. So in a smaller business, especially when they're hiring their first salespeople, you got to keep in mind the cost of an underperformer. The cost of an underperforming salesperson can be anywhere from sometimes high six figures, sometimes even seven figures a year when you include the opportunity cost. So the cost of our assessment individually priced is $200 per test. So relative to that cost of an underperformer, relatively small price to pay for some insurance, if you will.
Yeah.
And then, of course, for a larger company, oftentimes, yes, you'll get that feedback that they've tried many different things, but oftentimes they haven't been successful. And they can be frustrated, yes, because they've gone for years unsuccessfully attempting to use either an assessment or an interview process, and they haven't looked at the right things. That's the most common thing. That's one of the questions we'll get is, what makes our drive test different than all of the other assessments out there? Really two key distinctions. Number one, we are the only assessment that goes after drive, need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. It's literally our patented model. But then number two, the way the questions are put together. Quite frankly, Wes, many assessments are out there. Many of them, unfortunately, can tend to be a little easy for sales candidates especially, to kind of size up the test, as you can imagine, kind of figure out what it's looking for, and then kind of fake their way through. So, for example, if you're a candidate, you're looking over a test and the question says something like, I consider myself very persuasive. Rate this from 1 to 5, 1 low to 5 high. What are you going to say? So in this case, we use a question format designed to eliminate that. It's called forced choice. So for each question, the person gets a series of 3 statements, all of which will sound positive. So a question, for example, may say something like, I consider myself a leader. I have great relationship skills. I'm very organized. Okay, now which of these is most like you and which is least like you? So obviously that then forces the candidate to make some very tough distinctions, but then it gives us a much better sense of their real priorities. And as they're working their way through the test, we're constantly monitoring their consistency as they respond to the questions because, again, as you can imagine, if they do try to fake the test, it's going to be very difficult for them to remember consistently what they ranked most and least across the entire assessment. So again, it's designed to be very robust for you in that regard. And we work at this point with over 900 companies worldwide. So we're very confident, if you will, in terms of the power of the predictive assessment.
So are you staying in touch with the company so hey, this person made it 3 months, 9 months, 5 years, and it has been the number one performer? I mean, are you getting that kind of feedback? We do. And it's very gratifying to hear, as you can imagine. We actually have that type of result documented in our technical manual, of course, for the drive test, but with the individuals, companies with whom we work, we'd like to make sure that we follow up regularly, looking at their scores, the spread of the candidate scores, and looking at how people ultimately perform. Now, of course, at the end of the day, the person's performance is a result of many different factors beyond just personnel. It's sort of like an athlete. We have to look at all elements of what one might think of as a sales ecosystem, if you will. So fit with the company culture, fit with the management style, fit with the compensation plan. All of those things at the end of the day come together to determine how successful the person is going to be, again, much like an athlete. In this case, what we look at with the drive test is how high can they jump, if you will, how fast can they run. We're looking at kind of that natural raw athletic ability, which is, again, critical for those hunters. Now, can salespeople be too optimistic? Oh yeah, boss, this is a done deal. I'm going to kill my quota, and then they don't kill their quota, and it's not a done deal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. It depends how those 3 characteristics interact together: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. You're exactly right. So picture someone that's very high in optimism, but they're low on the other 2. So this is a person who's very optimistic. Yes, the next sale is always right around the corner. They're absolutely certain that they're going to do well, but you're exactly right. Then they end up frustrating everyone internally again and again because they just don't deliver. That's why the other two pieces are important as well. I remember when I started doing this work back in, 2002, I was working with a small company in Wisconsin, and the CEO of the company was very frustrated, had a salesperson that they had just let go, and many of the customers were calling very upset that this guy had been let go. They loved him. He was super high in optimism. He would always bring pizza. He'd bring donuts. The next sale was always right around the corner. There was always a promise, but he never delivered. And they were upset because they missed him. They enjoyed that low commitment, high party type vibe. Whereas, again, the person who not only has that high optimism, but they also have that need for achievement and competitiveness. That's the sort of individual that has the potential to be successful as a hunter. Yes, you need to have that desire to do well for the sake of doing well. You need that competitiveness. But then where optimism comes into play in that case is then you have that individual for whom, even on their darkest day, they know they're going to be successful. It's particularly important, as you can imagine, Wes, if you have, say, a new product, a product that really doesn't have many competitors, and you're in a space where you have a long sales cycle and maybe skeptical prospects. That's the ultimate situation where you really need the quote-unquote evangelist, if you will. And that's where optimism can become particularly important in addition to the other two elements.
Right. Now, what about these hunters? Because obviously they're important. They're important in a company trying to break into a new territory. Usually their marketing's not very good, so they need somebody that can go break down doors. I know because I lived in that world for over a decade. To a degree, running my own business, I've got to do that still.
Yep.
But how? Same thing. I mean, they can be too optimistic. They can also be too much of a hunter, right? Are there warning signs like, hey, this guy is off the charts? Don't hire him because he's too much of a bull in a china shop.
That's a very good question. And that is, as you can imagine, one of the things that companies do want to avoid is that individual that's going to be the bull in the china shop that's, not going to necessarily be self-aware and may get in their own way. The nice aspect of the characteristics that we're looking for here, particularly need for achievement, is that if the person is doing things that are getting in their own way, they will want to listen. Particularly, again, that person that's strong in need for achievement. Again, as I mentioned, they're like that kid in school that just wants to get an A. So you can sit down with them and say, okay, here are the things you're doing well. Here's some things you're doing that are kind of getting in your way, and they'll make those adjustments. They're like a sponge. They want to learn. They want to get better for you, if you will. Whereas if you take someone that's, say, low in need for achievement, maybe they're super competitive, super optimistic. Yeah, that can be the danger of having that bull in the china shop, if you will. They just, again, they've got that desire to compete, but they don't have that achievement orientation to pursue excellence for its own sake. So that can be a little bit more challenging to deal with. So yes, you want to make sure you get the balance right.
Right. And what do you say to somebody, they've been around for a while and they're like, look, I got a gut feel. I'm good with people. I can read people. I don't need this assessment. Have you found any soothsayers?
Of course. And again, I would say to them, your gut feel is important still. It's important, especially to look at things like cultural fit. Do you like this person? Is there a good chemistry between you? That's certainly an important thing. But underneath the surface, as you can imagine, during the interview process, many candidates can be very skilled at kind of filibustering their way through the interview, if you will, especially if managers aren't familiar with the sorts of questions they need to ask. The candidate will often come in. They'll have studied up. They'll read books on how to interview well, and those books will suggest to them that if at all possible, they take over the interview. And that's what they'll do. They'll take over the interview. And so now they're in charge. And again, the person can get a good gut feel that this may be a good match for them in terms of a candidate. But then again, underneath the surface, they may really lack that passion. That's the benefit of having the assessment. We never say it's the be all end all. I like to describe it as a bit like having your consumer report, if you will, before you make a major buying decision. It sort of says, hey, buyer beware. If you are impressed with this person, okay, but just make sure that you cover these areas that are coded, say, in red or yellow to the point that you are comfortable before bringing them on board. As you can imagine, it makes you much more powerful then as a hiring manager going into that new hire, which is so critical, especially your first few, with your eyes wide open.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you say that because that was my trick. I would take over and then turn it around, ask them questions, then they're selling me.
Yep. And many people just don't know how to interview. I mean, there's not necessarily a class in how to interview that everyone gets to take. So it's all about, again, making sure that you're ready for that interview, have your questions. I like to make sure everyone has their questions written out ahead of time. You always know exactly where you're going to go. So again, you're never caught off guard.
What are your thoughts on challenging a salesperson. I'm a big fan, and I've recommended to most of my clients, somewhere in the interview, even very early on in the screening, I'll have them say, yeah, this looks all good, but yeah, I don't think you're what we're looking for.
Certainly.
And have them see how they respond, right?
Yeah, that can be a very effective way to kind of get a sense of, again, a live sense of how optimistic is this individual. It's important to keep in mind that sometimes we need to build some of these underlying skills. So the person's, say, persistence or persuasiveness, sometimes we can develop those. So that's one of the questions we'll often get in a related way is, what about having the person do a demo of some kind? And yes, that can be an important diagnostic up front, but I would rather make sure that the person had that natural drive underneath, which would be shown by them being persistent when you kind of push back on them. And maybe they need to build their skills at doing that demo. But you can teach those sorts of skills. You can teach somebody to do an effective demo. You can help them build relationship skills or build persuasion. But underneath the surface, you cannot capture or you cannot change that drive. That's why with the drive test, we look at the 3 elements, but we also look at, again, persuasion. Does the person enjoy selling and negotiating? Will they move the sale from the first call to the second call to the close? We look at confidence. Does the person have that thick skin in order to handle rejection? Look at relationship skills. Is the person comfortable reaching out to other people socially? And then we look at organizational skills. Is this the sort of person who kind of dot their I's and cross their T's, if you will? All of those become important, but that drive characteristic that we cannot teach is really, the key one if we are hiring a hunter.
How accurate is kind of like a mutual fund? I tell my clients, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Just because somebody has sold in the past.
Yep.
Doesn't mean they're going to sell well for you.
True.
But it seems like companies are they're looking for somebody with a Rolodex. They're looking for somebody, with 5 years of experience in the industry.
Sure.
And is that an accurate indicator of how well they'll do?
It's an accurate indicator if used correctly. So here's a classic mistake many companies will make. Let's say you're a smaller company and you want someone to come on board, maybe to be your first salesperson who has a lot of experience dealing with a certain type of product. And you have a resume of someone who has a great track record of success at a very large company, a large company with a great degree of brand recognition and collateral behind them. And you think, wow, this person's had all this training. Surely they will be effective for me. Not necessarily, of course.
I had that exact thing. That's what moved me
at your level. Yes,
that's what moved me to California. I was in Austin, and my wife's from here, so we moved here to be by our family as well. But I was working for a startup in Austin, and I had the whole 18 Western states. This was 2004. We were very small, and then as we started to grow, they started hiring people, and they hired this guy out of Denver who came from a big company. He had an assistant, that he shared with a few other guys. He had a systems engineer that would, run around and do all of his demos and stuff. And he just had this whole team, right? And I'm sharpening pencils, shining shoes, making the sale, doing the quotes, doing the demos, doing the training. I was first level support. Just everything. And the guy, so I give up half my territory to this guy. And he lasted like 6 months and blew my stuff up. Then I got to get it back and piece it together. It was that exact scenario.
Yeah. And that's very, very common, unfortunately. So yes, previous success can be an indicator, but I would want to look at, in that scenario, has the person had previous success in a similar industry at a similar size company? Because when you're moving from a situation where you've had all that brand recognition behind you, the key question is, okay, the person's been successful at that larger company. What led to their success? Was it their own effort? Okay, good. Or was it the fact that, again, they had all of that help, if you will? Oftentimes you're better off getting that person that, again, had that experience at that smaller company that had to knock on the door, that didn't have the benefit of that brand recognition behind them, that had to do everything they could to succeed. Now that person, again, having that experience, maybe 3 to 4 years of that behind them, and a 4 or a 5 on drive, they're in that green zone on drive. That tends to be the combination where the person has a much higher potential of succeeding, especially if you want them to be up to speed relatively quickly.
So who can manage these hunters?
You need the right type of mentality. You're absolutely right. There are some companies that just aren't ready culture-wise to bring on high drive salespeople. They don't have that. They don't have that company culture. So one of the questions we'll get is, can an effective salesperson always become an effective manager? Not always. Sometimes somebody who's a great hunter doesn't necessarily go on to become a great manager, because now instead of getting results on their own, they have to get results through others. So oftentimes the great manager of a hunter is someone who's going to be very patient, who's going to be able to give them that guidance. We don't specifically do sales management guidance. We focus more on the diagnostics, but I can tell you that someone who is particularly high in need for achievement, this is the person who's motivated by recognition. They love having that opportunity, kind of like that, again, that kid in school that gets to see their grades or their paper up on the refrigerator. They love having that recognition in front of the group. They like that, again, that individual that just needs to have that validation, if you will. That tends to be a much bigger motivator in many cases than money. That's one of the questions we often get is, well, what about money? What if we just have a lot of external motivators and we just motivate the person with money? Or we'll start working with a company and the sales manager will say, well, I like to look for candidates, for example, that have a mortgage, a couple car payments, kids in school, all these external things to motivate them. Then in that same conversation later on, they'll say, it's so frustrating. I've got one or two salespeople. I've seen them sell before. I know they've got what it takes. But for some reason now, month after month, quarter after quarter, they're just turning in the exact same performance. They plateaued. What's going on? Well, those two things are typically related because, of course, they brought in the person that has those external motivators. And yes, those sorts of factors can be very motivating. But at some point, those pressures are relieved. Well, now the key question is, once those pressures are gone, what is that person going to do to continue to excel? The person motivated by those external factors will often say, okay, fine. Now they've satisfied them. Now they know what they need to kind of phone in, if you will, quarter after quarter to maintain. Whereas the person motivated by need for achievement will continue to excel. They'll continue to produce. Money's still important to them, but they look at money the same way that, say, a great athlete looks at points on the scoreboard. It's how they show how well they've done rather than their goal in and of itself. So to give you an example, think of Michael Jordan before a big game. If you were to ask him, what's your goal out there tonight, Michael? He wouldn't say score a lot of points. He would say it's to be the best ever.
Right.
At the same time, you wouldn't want to cap him. You wouldn't say, oh, okay, Michael, that sounds good. Anything you score beyond 20 points, we're not going to put up there. Well, he probably wouldn't be very motivated. So again, it's getting that balance just right, if you will.
Yeah. And why do companies do that? They'll cap a salesperson's earnings. I'm like, are you out of your mind?
I've heard of stories where salespeople will hear things from their managers or owners, things along the lines of, well, you shouldn't, the salesperson shouldn't make more than the sales manager, or things like that.
Right.
What are you thinking? Yes, they should. If you want the company to grow, that person's growing the pie for everybody. The person should have unlimited opportunity to grow. There should never be a limit on the amount of points that they can put on the scoreboard. You want to unleash that person, never put a cap on them. I've never understood the psychology behind that, other than just a misunderstanding fundamentally of how the process is supposed to work.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because I always tell people, my background, in the military, I bring up things like, Napoleon said, a soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. Mm-hmm. And salespeople are too, like they think. I remember when I was interviewing coming out of the military, and I was a stockbroker, and a guy was like, why do you want to do this? And I said, I'm money motivated. Mm-hmm. I got a family, I grew up without money. It's like, I need to make money.
Yep.
And I didn't blow it, right? Mm-hmm. We live within our means. My wife has stayed home for 22 years, but it is how you keep score.
Yep.
But I do remember still to this day, I ended up buying my own Breitling watch because I could, because at that same company I mentioned, I hit my number, but somehow, and though, if you hit your number, you got a Breitling. But something happened, and I still don't quite know. Somehow, I think because the way we chopped up the territory, then I took it back, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I was like, whatever, 95% of quota. I was like, oh, hell no. I'm 125% of quota. But they stuck to their guns, didn't give me a watch, and I didn't work for them very much longer. Mm-hmm. So this was millions of dollars of sales, right? This was a $5,000 watch.
Yep.
I wanted that watch.
Yep.
It wasn't the money. I could have bought 10 of them.
Yep.
But they didn't give me the watch. And it was downhill after that. So, if you're listening to this, if you're a company, salespeople, Give them. You're right. It's not just money. The recognition, the bragging rights.
Yep.
Means a lot, and it sounds like from your assessments, I mean, you're looking for people with that drive, right? That they like that recognition.
Exactly.
So people know. I mean, it could be, salesperson of the month or the quarter, like a special parking place or whatever. It could be a stupid little trophy, 6 inches tall. They can sit on their cubicle wall and everybody knows, oh, that's the boss right now. That's the guy to beat.
It costs relatively little to you. It means everything to them.
Exactly. And I tell people too, that's why network marketing is so successful. Mm-hmm. People and things like Jenny Craig, right? Weekly weigh-ins, weekly acknowledgement. But network marketing, they don't have 3 levels, right? They have 33 levels. Yep. Everybody, let's bring Chris up. Christopher, great job. You're a quadruple diamond, ruby, platinum, emerald, titanium today, and you get a ribbon. Yep. Right. And because they want you to have these incremental awards, mm-hmm. and people stick with it. Right?
Yep.
It's crazy how these examples are all around if we would just notice them, right? Just open our eyes and pay attention.
Yes. And again, one of the questions we often get is, after the assessment, after you've got the results, you've decided, okay, this person scored well. We never say the test is the be-all, end-all. I like to say if the person has done well on the assessment, they've earned the opportunity now to be grilled by you in the interview. And that's where you bring them in and you remember, as I mentioned, the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. Yeah. So bringing them in, for example, when we look at the 3 elements of drive, need for achievement, tell me about the greatest goal you ever accomplished professionally. Really have them flesh that out for you. Then you can stop and reflect back to them. You have to be proud of that. How do you intend to top it? Again, the person high in need for achievement has a plan to top it, and they're excited to tell you about it. You have put them up to the plate and given them the chance to knock it out of the park. What kinds of sacrifices have you had to make to be successful? What does that person consider to be a sacrifice? Was it maybe they had to come in a couple of weekends last year, or was it something more substantial? Now compare that to the kinds of sacrifices you've seen your top performers make. For competitiveness, tell me the last time you were competitive at work. What did that look like for you? The person will be able to tell you about a situation where they were just enjoying the competition, enjoying, just as we just discussed, the opportunity to, again, kind of compete with their peers and be the best, if you will, among the group. For optimism, tell me about a time when you remained persistent, even though everyone else around you gave up. Now tell me about another time, just getting those consistent examples.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine too, it is a kind of a faster pace, right? You don't want them pondering too much, right? Are you looking for that gut reaction because it's more honest?
Yes. Although occasionally you will get people that will have some trouble, as we talk about it in the book. You'll get people that will say that they can't come up with an answer and will ask to maybe skip the question. We typically recommend just stopping, slowing down, give them all the time they need to answer that question. Now, generally, if they've been brought into the interview, if they've done well on the test, you shouldn't see much of a problem, especially the person high in need for achievement. They're usually chomping at the bit. But if for some reason they may be nervous or something like that, I like to give them enough time to answer the question or just to do the best they can to formulate a response. Again, I've in doing the work when I first started doing some of the interviewing techniques that I talk about in the book, I remember having candidates that would say, "Gosh, Dr. Croner, you're really nice, but these questions are hard." Mm-hmm. Said, yes, that's the point. We want to make sure that the match is right, again, on both sides. You don't want to put the person in a situation where the company is going to be miserable, but they're also going to be miserable. You want to make sure it's right on both sides.
Yeah, so how do you balance that? In sales, I mean, I know I lean a little more towards grilling them hard in the interview versus being a nice guy. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Do you recommend that? Does it all depend? Or because I feel like in sales, I want to put the screws to them because that's how business is going to be.
Sure.
They're not just going to fall over and just hand over your credit card. Mm-hmm. So I want somebody that's strong.
Sure, absolutely. And in many ways, as you can imagine, by doing so, you kind of kill 2 birds with one stone. At the same time that you're asking them the questions, you're also getting a behavioral sample from that person that's relevant to what you'd ask them to do. So yes, that's absolutely fine. Different interviewers have different styles. The key is to make sure that whatever you do, that you're able to get a thorough understanding one way or another in terms of that person's level of the characteristics that you're looking for. So you're able to fill in, how strong is this person in your opinion when it comes to overall drive? the three elements: need for achievement, competitiveness, optimism. How strong are they when it comes to confidence, relationship skills, persuasion, organizational skills? So however you want to go about that, ideally using those behavioral questions to understand what they've done in the past, though, at the same time. Because, of course, you may get somebody that, let's say if you looked at their drive profile, they have a low score on drive, but they have a very strong score on, say, persuasion and relationship, two more teachable skills, and you bring that person into the interview. I'll oftentimes put up a profile like that when I do a presentation. I'll ask the audience, what do you think that this person would look like in the interview if you didn't know? That's sort of the person that typically knows the right things to say. So yes, if we're doing things with them in the interview that's allowing them to show, yes, they have the sales skills. So yes, they can sell. That's wonderful. But then the key distinction then too is, will they? So during the interview, and even when they first come on board, they're in that honeymoon period. They have a strong incentive to do well. There's high stakes. But now when we bring them on board and those stakes aren't quite as high, are they going to continue to produce at that level? That's why we look at that drive trait so strongly as well. Right.
Very cool. All right. So you mentioned a book. Where do we send people? What's the book and where do we send them to get it?
Our book is called Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. It's available on Amazon in hardcover as well as in Kindle. It's also on our website, salesdrive.info.
Very nice. Salesdrive.info. So we will link to both of those in the show notes. So with that, because it's a Friday, and God, it's 5:30. That's dedication. You
get one more thing, though. I'd be happy to make an offer to your listeners too, Wes. If you go to our website, salesdrive.info. There's a big green button right there at salesdrive.info. You can request a complimentary drive test. That will include a full drive test. You can use it with a candidate or a current salesperson. You'll get not only the drive test report, which we've discussed, you'll also get their production builder report. The production builder report is our developmental report that gives you all the same scores that you get in the drive test from 1 to 5. But then it gives you a couple of additional pages of things you can do to mentor or motivate that person, given their unique psychological profile on those more teachable traits like persuasion, relationship skills, etc. And if you would like, I would be delighted to schedule a call with any of those individuals. Again, this is really only appropriate for individuals who are in sales management or HR. We don't test salespeople, but for anyone who's in sales management or HR, we are happy to make that offer available to you at salesdrive.info.
All right. So I'm writing that down. Sales management and HR. Very cool. So I appreciate you doing that.
Of course.
Well, all right. Dr. Christopher Croner, so owner of salesdrive.info. Thanks for coming on the Sales Podcast. It's been awesome.
My pleasure. My pleasure. If I could ever do anything else to be of service in the future, never hesitate to ask.
Sounds good. Well, have a great weekend.
Have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Told you we had some good stuff in there. I like his approach. I like the fact that Christopher has done his own work, his own research, his own proprietary system, and that he backs it up, that he researches, that he stays in touch, he confirms his findings and his results with past clients. So I highly recommend you take a peek at that. We always say, trust, or what is it? Trust but verify. Try these different tools. Verify that they work. And it may take 3 months. It may take a year, of using a few different tests, seeing the people that you bring on, seeing what caliber of candidates you end up hiring, seeing how they work out in your own company. But very few people take the time to really do that kind of work, to do it in their marketing, their advertising, to do it in their recruiting, to do it in their pay plans. I mean, on and on and on. Nothing is stagnant, right? You can't just do one thing, have one SOP, and everything just works forever. One slogan just works forever. It doesn't. I've said it so many times. Even McDonald's, the U.S. Army, Coca-Cola, big entities are changing their slogans from time to time. It's ad fatigue, and things just change. Society changes. So you got to keep working on these things. So check out his test. Let me know how it works. Let me know what you think. I think it's legit. That's why I had him on. And if you need other ideas about how to test and verify in your own business, check out Make Every Sale, makeeverysale.com. It's more than just sales training. That's why I'm in talks. I actually had a friend come out 2 weeks ago, first week of the year, spent 3 days with me, hammering out a new pipeline. I'm looking at starting a high-level mastermind for a very small group of 12 people. It'll be a 1-year mastermind. Looking at making the Make Every Sale program just an on-demand course, one set price. You get all the recorded calls, all the pre-recorded videos, the workbook. You get all that, and then taking basically what is now the Make Every Sale course and renaming it the Inner Circle and limiting that as well. And so you can dip your toe in the water with Make Every Sale, join the Inner Circle for more interactive calls and support, and then join the Mastermind for the greatest level of interaction with me. That is not yet a plan. So if you buy the Make Every Sale course today, you will be rolled into the Inner Circle. So that's a little benefit there if you take fast action, because as we figure out the exact packaging and the pricing, we've got the landing pages built. We've got some dates penciled in that will be firming up here shortly. So if you've ever thought about jumping in, working with me, getting my input, getting new ideas, getting access to kick around things, ask questions, get some neutral third-party feedback and input on things you're working on. Like I said, sales, marketing, advertising, you name it. Check it out, makeeverysale.com. It still has a 1-year money-back guarantee. You can join month to month. It's really no risk. So do it while you can. And with that, I bid you farewell. When you listen to this, I'll be on a jet aeroplane heading to Dallas, then Pensacola, then we drive over to Summerdale, and then I'll be there the rest of the week until I head to Tampa. And so that was the other thing, right? HelpWesSwim.org. Help me help these families of the Navy SEALs. Now go sell something.